Yeah. So again, vocabulary and discourse, bricks and mortar of English language development. And just again, I'm in Treaty 6, and I am just grateful for this change of season. I don't know about you, but this is such a beautiful time of year as we see the things change and go into slumber. And I'm just excited to see what winter's going to be like, and as we change. And I'd just like to also highlight the calls to action, and they're linked here, but also, you know, the one that speaks to me a lot, among the many others, but just that calling on Canada to respect the rights of Aboriginal people, and this includes their right to have their languages respected. And I know we're working with English as an additional language students, and working hard as we can to keep their languages alive, but also what can we do to keep the Indigenous languages that have been and on this land for so many generations before us. Some of our guiding questions, well, one of our guiding questions today is looking at what is the importance of vocabulary and discourse in academic language. And so, you know, feel free to share your thoughts and ideas either through the chat or verbally. And we'll also have a little moment where you can share an item from your Learn in the chat. So, and you're probably wondering, what's Learn, Stephanie? What's that all about? And I'll tell you in a minute, but I just also like to remind you of the survey that was sent out to you. And if you bring that up in your email, and if you could take a moment to complete that, I'd be very grateful for that. And so that I can get some feedback. Did this meet your learning expectations? What can I do to improve? And is there any follow-up sessions that you would like to see from this? All right, so learning is, L is, what did you love? What did you love in this session? And E is, what am I excited to start? A, oh, I have the wrong word underlined there. I apologize. I want to ask. What would you like to ask? And R, is there something that you think that you're ready to implement, like maybe even tomorrow, and move from there? And N is, what are your next steps? So I gave you some sentence starters there that you can build on your thinking, and I'll just leave that up for a moment so you can jot that down. So as we go through the session, maybe there's some things that you can add to this type of note catcher. All right. Great. So just a little bit of the outline for our session today is we're going to be touching on communicative competence. What does that involve? What is vocabulary and discourse, and just a little bit of putting it all together. So that's kind of our outline for today. But we'll start out with a little activity here. And so I'd just like you to complete this task before we get started. So okay. Well, maybe I'll read it out for you.
Could we use Google Translate?
Can try.
Thai is not our language.
Yep. So, Lacuna din Pagalan on Pune and Deliotian. So, anybody? No? Nothing? Okay, well, Task not completed. All right. So as you can see, that kind of ties into a little bit about communicative competence. So communicative competence is that ability to understand and use language effectively to communicate in a wide variety of contexts and for a wide variety of purposes. So this is kind of the framework that the EAL benchmarks are built upon, is to get our students to communicate competently. And so this is kind of the structure from the 2010 version of the ESL benchmarks. But a lot of the new benchmarks that you may see, that this is also big into play. So I'm just connecting it also. So you'll see that there's a linguistic quadrant, a strategic quadrant, a sociolinguistic quadrant, and a discourse quadrant. But I'm going to tie it in a little bit to that. Susan Dutrow and Jeff Sweers, they talk about bricks, mortar, and buildings. And so kind of an architectural sort of model to it. But if we think about bricks, those are that vocabulary that's specific to the content and the concepts taught in a discipline. So if we're talking about mathematics, quadrilateral, quadratic formula, conics, geometry, all of those kinds of ideas, those are bricks. If we're talking about science, photosynthesis, and symbiotic relationships, and whatever it may be in science, it just failed me off the top of my head. And if we're talking about ELAL, we're talking about figurative language, analogies, and metaphors and onomatopoeia, things like that. So things that are discipline specific are our brick words. The mortar words and the phrases are that general utility vocabulary that's needed to put all those ideas together. So constructing sentences and paragraphs so that we can engage in those discussions using academic English. So they're kind of the glue. And when you think about, the knowledge pieces and what you want your students to be able to say, you want them to be using the brick words and the mortar words together to share a complete thought. So, and when you think about, if you build something, if you just build a wall, say, with just bricks, it's not going to be very structurally sound, so it's just going to fall over, right? And the mortar words, they kind of help give that glue and bind them together. And then on the discourse side of things, then if we think about buildings, so we've taken our bricks, we've taken our mortar, we've built a structure. But when you think about language, language has different purposes to it, right? So I use language to, make friends. I use language to find and navigate my way around my environment, or like my school, or getting to work, or whatever. But I also use language to, to argue or to persuade or whatever it may be. And when you think about language and those different purposes, it kind of ties into the buildings aspect of it. So buildings, I'm in a house right now that has a specific purpose. If I go to the grocery store, that has a different structure than my house does. So it has a different purpose, right? And so when we think about language and the structures of language match the purpose of the language that we're doing. So I'll touch on that a little bit more as we go through. If it doesn't make quite sense, then please feel free to reach out. But yeah, so we're thinking about those patterns of organization and the conjunctions, those transition words. So let's try this activity again. Let's see what we can do to help with that communicative competence. Okay, so again, Lacuna, Dime Pagalan, and Pune and Delizian. I'm going to give you a tool here So it's called What to Say Instead of I Don't Know. And it's a bit of a metacognitive strategy. So if you think about independent learners, they have the language to help them figure things out. And sometimes with our English as an additional language students, they don't have that language yet to ask for help, right? So they eventually just go, I don't know, I don't know. And I mean, even some of our English speaking students, especially in junior high school, sometimes they may just go, hmm. And then, so we're like, oh, okay, well, maybe you don't know, but maybe you don't have the language to ask for that help. So I have, just going to go in here, Control Shift F. I put this is hyperlinked here, but I just thought I've put some of the resources that are hyperlinked in this presentation up for you, it already displayed. So it's hyperlinked. It'll ask you to make a copy, and you can access this document if you want to use it for your school, your purposes, whatever it may be. So it'll ask you to make a copy, and it's a little small, but just so you know that don't just print it off on your computer at home or maybe even at work, because the page setup is to be for a 2 foot by 3 foot poster. So just so you know that, you may want to go into the page setup first. There's a few instructions here on how to use this resource, and also a couple of videos to see it in action. And so basically and I've also embedded a little translation feature in here. So if you go under the extensions, you can see Google Slide Translation, and then you can open Translate. And, okay. And it's running the script, and it'll ask for some permission just because I added it on. So it just needs your permission to run, kind of like when you have those extensions. So I'll just walk through that process with you. And we'll allow that. Okay, so you can take this and you can highlight some of the text, and you can go into the extension and you can open Translate, and it'll come up with a couple of different languages for you to translate the document into. So you may have this big poster up in your classroom, but you may have other students who speak other languages in your classroom, and, making something comprehensible for them, like, okay, I'll translate it. Maybe it's not the best perfect translation, but maybe I translate it into German. And so then it says, könnte ich bitte weitere Informationen haben? So then the student would have, maybe you cut and maybe you make copies that are smaller that they can just keep at their desk. And then you have the big one on the wall, but then they can make that, okay, that's what it means. Then they can ask for some more information. So knowing that and coming back to here to our little activity here, please type in the chat what you would like. Would you like some more information? Would you like some time to think? Should I repeat the question? How do I say blah in English? How do I pronounce it in English? Or I think it means, or could I ask a friend for help? So feel free to type something in the chat and see, what would you like? Please have some more information. All right, more information, please. Okay, we can do that for you. All right, so I'm going to add some visuals. So Lacuna, Pangolin, und Pune in Deletian. And what I'm going to do is I'm also going to model it for you. So just watch in the chat. for my modeling. There you go. So if you could now please complete this task, I'd love to see how well we did by adding some more of that information. Awesome. Thank you. Great. Awesome. Thank you. Now I'm getting to know some people in the room. Great. Super. Oh, all the way from Caroline. Wow. I know where that is. Played hockey there, where my kids did. Awesome. Great. Super. So for those of you who are watching the recording right now, so what I modeled in the chat was my name and my occupation, and now everybody is sharing that in the chat. So it's wonderful. Awesome. That's great. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. So, so I have a little bit.ly here for you where you can access this presentation. I'll just put that in the slide as well. And hopefully it's working. I haven't been having some issues with bit.ly. And then there's also a little QR code in the bottom there if you like to scan it and watch it on your phone. So that's some information for you. So you have full access to the slides. Hope you understand why I didn't give it away right away. Didn't want to spoil the surprise of this. So awesome. Great. So why did that adding visuals assist with your communicative competence? And communicative competence, again, is that ability to understand and use that language effectively to communicate in a wide variety of contexts for a wide variety of purposes. So we're a fairly small group. If you'd like to unmute or just put your hand up first, and then we can respond, or you can type something in the chat. Why do you think those visuals helped with your communicative competence? Helped especially with your understanding, and then eventually you were using it, right? You were typing your response in the chat.
So even though I didn't know what the words meant, the pictures helped me, like the name tag and the pen writing. Those are things I recognize no matter, it didn't matter the language.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, and then we've got some comments here. It gave some connections to understanding the vocabulary words and making those connections to your prior knowledge, right? So trying to find some of those connections as well. So, and I tried to find visuals that would transfer across all kind of understandings. I tried to, you know, make them kind of culturally appropriate as well. Did my best on that. Awesome. We have another one. Yeah, and you know, visual learners. But you know, even when you think about when we're learning a new language, I don't know if you've ever traveled to a place where you may not speak the language of the country you're visiting, but you look for a lot of visual cues and clues to help you find your way to the train station, or which train you're supposed to be on, or you know, order a beverage of your choice, or to find your way around to the different you know, sightseeing venues and things like that. So visuals are huge and an important piece of understanding and making things comprehensible for anybody who's, you know, learning a language. And the other piece is that, you know, with communicative competence and the visuals, we're constantly trying to map on what we know onto our new learning. So we have this little pterodactyl, and he knows that PT in his name makes the sound T. So he's going to transfer everything that he knows about the sound t onto his language learning. So is he wrong in this? Like, you know, he's making sense from what he knows and mapping it on to the English that he's learning. So we need to think that when we're learning a language, you're, like you said, you're making connections to what you already know and your prior knowledge, and mapping that onto the language that you're learning. So yeah, so we're going to touch on some of those pieces today. So that's just a little bit about communicative competence. We're looking at bricks, mortar, discourse especially. And so now we're just going to move into vocabulary. So a little piece about vocabulary, again, just reiterating a little bit more about what bricks and mortar words are. So those brick terms are highly visible, discipline-specific terms, are photosynthesis, hegemony, imagery, whatever it may be. And the mortar words, those mortar terms, are those universal words and phrases that happen across all disciplines, and they're, you know, they have textual references and interpersonal references as well. So that meta discourse piece. And when we think about vocabulary in kind of that tiered way of thinking, so pulling a lot from Beck, McCown, and Kuchen's work, and also, I don't know, like this session's kind of more geared towards junior high teachers, but if you happen to be in the K-6 world at all, this tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 vocabulary pyramid could be maybe familiar to you. But when we think about tier 1 words, they're very high frequency. They're used in everyday conversation, and they make up 80% of written text. So that's a large chunk of vocabulary that we're using, and I'm using it right now. You know, like everything, pretty much is 80% probably of what I'm saying is tier 1 vocabulary. And then we have that tier 2 vocabulary, which is general academic vocabulary that's found in academic texts across curriculum, and it also may have multiple meanings. So on average, it makes about 8 to 10% of informational, technical, and literary text. And then again, there's that tier 3 vocabulary, which is low frequency academic vocabulary. And when we think about that, that's the concepts, right? The bricks that we want our students to understand for whichever discipline that we're working with. So, but then when you think about tier 1 and tier 2, that's the vocabulary that's needed to understand and explain those concepts. So, you know, we may be talking about quadratic, or I'm going to use quadratic expressions or whatever piece of algebra, and those are definitely some concepts, right? That brick vocabulary. But if I want my student to be able to describe how they solve that problem, they're going to need the tier 1 and tier 2 vocabulary. So I've also set up, just for your information, this academic word list here in the presentation is hyperlinked. Just in the essence of time, I've already brought it up. But you can see that like there's over, what did they say, 570 word families, and they broke it up into about 10 sublists. And you can see that how they're kind of all connected. So analyze, and then it's taking analyzed. And so there's different conjugations of it. So, but words like define or context or derive. So, and these are just words to be aware of that you may be using. They're definitely assessment words, right? So words that we're asking our students to, you know, define or even area. So things like that. So take a look through that. I'll be showing a little bit, a little piece of that. as well a little bit later. But also thinking about, so even the word interpret, for example, and how it morphs into interpretation or interpretive or misinterpret or reinterpret. And we need to be aware that our English as an additional language students, the language that they're bringing with them already, maybe they don't expand on a word the way we do in English, right? So in English, we can change the part of speech a word is in by adding like the tion, or adding and maybe even changing the word, like from interpret to reinterpret, or how past tense works, or any of those pieces. So we need to be aware that, if students may not be understanding that word, that they that maybe they're not understanding how the word changes with the suffix or prefix, and also yeah, how that word can change. I remember working with a student, and we were reading a little article, and we did a little bit of vocab before it, and he just kind of matching a definition to the word, and he wasn't aware that the word activist was a noun, was a person, because, and then so when I shared with him that adding the ist on to the end of a word, then like you have an artist, you have a psychologist, you have an activist, and he was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like now I understand, like when I'm seeing that word, then I know that it's like a noun, then it's a person. So just bringing some of those things to light for our students is a big benefit. So and also, yeah, so that's just kind of when we think about vocabulary, we want to kind of keep this idea in our minds about the different tiers of it. Yeah, so, and also when we think about vocabulary, we want to think about how, again, according to that function of language that we're using, that it can change from, our basic interpersonal communication skills and cognitive academic language proficiency. So this is Jim Cummins's work. Maybe you're familiar with it already, but when you're thinking about our basic interpersonal communication skills, it's our functional language. It's the language that we need to go from day-to-day living, right? So conversations with friends or any informal interactions. And it's very not context embedded. Like it says, we have nonverbal cues that you can feed off of and come to understand what's going on. You have visuals, lots of those pieces. So, and, a majority of time, this is what we're using, our students, just on the basketball court or at recess or whatever it may be. It's a lot of Bics. And the language, and when you think about the vocabulary that's being used with that, it's more often one or two syllable words. It's not multisyllabic. So very simple, very short vocabulary words that's used with that. But then when we go to cognitive academic language proficiency, that's the language of school. And that's not something that, I don't know about you, but my family, we don't really talk around the dinner table, about the comparisons between Macbeth and Hamlet, so that's not something that we always talk about. So so we're using just Bix language around the dinner table, but the language of school is more abstract, fewer nonverbal cues, and it's harder to attach a visual to it. So how can we make that a little bit more explicit for our students? And maybe you have language learners in your class, but you may notice that they're speaking a lot, and they're joking around and doing a lot of interaction, and you think, oh yeah, their language is great. But then when it comes to that writing or trying to decipher some of the assessment pieces that they're asked to do, then how come they're not performing very well? Because they're like, it sounds like they're talking all the time. And using great language. So that's just some things to keep in mind. And, you know, in terms of vocabulary in that tier 2 vocabulary, when you think that it also has multiple meanings, when we think about just the simple word pass, right? I'm sure maybe you have more definitions for pass than I've come up with here, but, you know, there's the term pass to, you know, just pass on your turn, so you're not going to take part. Maybe I don't know how many schools in Alberta use a hall pass, but there's a hall pass, right? Or maybe you pass or you fail your class. Those have some different meanings, right? Or maybe you're passing someone on your bicycle or on the track or in your car, whatever it may be. Maybe you're looking at geographical features and you're looking at the Rogers Pass or different types of passes that happen in a geological sort of sense. Or maybe you're talking about legislative processes and you've got the bill is passed. What does that mean? So, and then, or maybe you're just saying, pass the ball, you know, in phys ed. So how do all those relate? So we need to think about, you know, those multiple meanings that a student is exposed to, and are we matching up, and are we giving them some clues about the specific meaning that we're addressing, right? The specific context. So some things to think about there. And also, you know, just as some more examples here, as, you know, academic language moves throughout the curriculum. This is from a grade 5 textbook, and these are some of the academic words, vocabulary that's lifted out of there. So you can think about, you know, solutions, but solutions, you know, I'm doing solutions in science. How does solutions relate to what I'm doing in social studies? Or I have a solution in math class. How does that relate to this? Maybe the word major. You know, we have a major in the Army. We have Major League Baseball. We have a major key in music. We have, you know, what am I studying? A major. What's my major? Things like that. Terminal, you know, I was in an airport terminal, or my aunt has terminal cancer. How are, you know, what does this mean? Why are they in here? And reactions. So just thinking about some of the vocabulary that you're dealing with in your discipline and trying to make it, you know, make your students aware of it, and so that they have some better understanding of what it's about. And as we're moving through the grades, you can see, like, so I'm just sticking with social studies, but you can see that the language becomes a lot more complex. This is just from one chapter from the grade 8 science or social studies textbook. So we're getting more, like we're getting conclusions and perspectives and process, and more as we're building on. And then this is just grade 10. So this is just the academic vocabulary from a grade 10 textbook. And, you know, like I said before, students may not realize that this word globalization is connected to the word global, which is connected to the word globe, but also globally, globalize. So how do we make sure that our students understand that all of those words are kind of connected with one another? And, you know, just to highlight some of the benchmarking. So when you're thinking about vocabulary that your students are using, so you can look at, you know, high frequency words, descriptive words, some academic or instructional words that they're using, and moving through the benchmarks and seeing how that progresses. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list at all, but it can give you some key indicators of, you know, maybe in terms of vocabulary where your students are at, and seeing, okay, like I'm not seeing them for the word like gigantic or huge, right? So I'd like to get them to move towards like massive or enormous. So it gives you kind of a gauge of how you can slowly build up students' vocabulary knowledge. And when we think about, the tasks we're asking our students to do, and, those pieces, we need to think about which words should they focus on. Should we focus on the word Asia? Should we focus on Dead Sea? Or, what's important for solving an equation like this, or a problem like this? What do they need to know prior to, tackling a problem like this? And this is just from a grade 7 math textbook that I pulled out. So some things that you may want to think about for them is that, maybe some of those low, high frequency words, I should say. So, and, those brick words that they need. So for example, they need to know what measurement is. They need to know rational number, what a subtraction statement is, what's distance. But then all of those other pieces too, like lowest point, highest point, below, above, represent. So what can we pull out to help them make sense of this question? Because that's a lot of dialogue to mess your way through. And then again, appealing to navigating that space where you're not sure where you're going, and adding a visual. So, this can really benefit students so much and then pointing out that vocabulary so that they have some of those pieces. So what does a subtraction statement look like? And those pieces as well. So just something to think about when we're asking students to tackle some of those pieces as well. So, and build that vocabulary. Maybe you have just a level A or a level 1 student, but by highlighting and adding some visuals, we can build that language with them. Oops. And building that space for them, word walls are a huge piece of that. But I say word walls in the sense that word walls being connected to your subject area. So not just word walls that are, just for the sake of word walls, but something that they can look at in the space that they're in. And just like that chart of what to say when I don't know, what can they look for in their learning environment to draw on. So one idea is interactive word walls, something that you can do and design so that you have some of those manipulatives, especially for that brick understanding, so that brick vocabulary, and developing those concepts. So I have a link in here to help you with that. Some of those interactive word walls, a bit of an article on building some of that. And also just building, a chart that you have displayed in your classroom, picking some of the words, maybe you have a selected reading, maybe you have a couple of word problems, whatever it may be that you're focusing on, but pulling some of those tier 2 words out from a selected reading, and then looking at how those parts of speech or how that word changes through those parts of speech by adding different affixes onto them. So I have a digital version that you are more than welcome to make a copy of, and then maybe add that to your Google Classroom, update it, use it as you will, so that you can have those different parts of speech and help students with that piece and understanding the related words to them. And this idea is from Elizabeth Coelho's work, and I'm very thankful for all the research and knowledge she's done on that. I've also added for your reference some links for common roots and affixes, PSYOP has some common word roots. There's also a gentleman on what formerly known as Twitter, where he had Morpheme Mondays. There's also for science root words as well. And when we think about, actually, yeah, science is such an incredible resource for our language learners, because they can fit so much language that's especially looking at the root words that can be transferred through across, so many different subject areas. So when you think about like photosynthesis, right? So we have photo for that. And then when we think about photograph, and what are all those different words that build onto that as well. And also just recognizing what cognates are. So cognates are words that, are very similar across certain languages. So, if we have, Spanish and English, for example, there's certain cognates in there. Even German, for example, like if you think the word for father in German is Vater, they almost sound the same. So cognates are words that sound similar and have a similar meaning. There is also a thing called false cognates, where you may have words that sound similar but mean different things. So just, having discussions with students is like, is this a word that you've seen in your language at all? And what might it mean in your language as well? Oops, how come we're not moving forward? There we go. And when we think about language as well, when we think about vocabulary, we need to remember that it's not just in a silo. So if a student just reads a word, they're not going to have the whole depth and breadth of that word or sentence phrase or whatever it may be, right? For one, when they're reading it, maybe they don't quite understand and know the phonetic, how it sounds phonetically, right? So maybe their decoding may not be quite there yet. And so when they're reading it, they may come up with one pronunciation of it. So that's why it's so important that they're also interacting with it with their peers, they're speaking with it, they're using it, and that they're writing it, and that they're hearing it. So all of their different language strands, that's at play, because language needs time to be developed and exposed to. When I think I'm trying to learn French here, and when the focus word of the lesson was meant because, so parce que, and when I finally heard that word, in discussion, then I was like, oh, I hear it now. Like I can, because when you're learning a language, it may sound like all just one big long sentence or one big long word. So you may not think that like there's different parts of it. So when I finally heard parce que, because I knew to listen for it, then I was excited, and then I could start using it in sentences and things like that. So we want that full interaction with all of those pieces. And full interaction is, again, adding that visual, providing a sentence frame, so and then having them interact, share those sentences with students, or with their peers. So you could see from this visual that, and having two different sentence frames, you could come up with so many different sentences, right? So and sharing it and using it can really give some empower our students as well. So yeah, so just thinking about how can you pair a visual, word bank, and a sentence frame, and so that's to get that thinking started and to get that teaching those tier 1 and tier 2 words like similar or different, and because, and formed by as well. Also using barrier games, again, you can use a sentence frame or word bank with your students, depending on which level that they're at. And so barrier games are kind of like where one person has one set of information and another person has a different set of information, but there's something, they can't see one another's work. So, and then there's some tools here that I've put in here. So like cleanup.pictures, cleanup.pictures, you can upload a picture into it, and then you can erase little pieces of it. So, and then embedding those different ideas in there so that students have some dialogue and some back and forth with that. And then also, just thinking about, so one person has the 3D visual for surface area, and the other person has the net. So, and then there's a couple of other examples that are embedded in here. So barrier games, there's an example of a video about where one student has a graph or a series of graphs, and then the other student has the description of the graphs or the scenario that led to the outcome of the graph. So, and then they have to try to match up those two pieces. Okay, so we're going to go into a little bit of discourse now, and we'll have some questions at the end, again, from your Learn Scaffold. And so what I want to share with you, though, is a little bit of background about what discourse is. So, and discourse was, kind of according to a linguist named G. And so we'll just kind of show this to you here. Hopefully I can get it started, because my mouse is being a little wacky. So there we go. Oops. Come on. It's not what I need right now. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm just gonna. Why isn't it working? I have no other way for making that work. All right. Give me 1 sec while I reboot my mouse. Pardon me. Brand new mouse too. Even make it go. 1 second here. Oh, now I can't even find it. I can't even stop the recording. I apologize for this. Okay, no, it's still wonky. Anybody have this up? I can share their screen. Oh, this is awful. go. It's totally frozen. Okay, it's kind of working. Okay, thank you, Angela. Can't even stop sharing this. Can I stop sharing this? All right, here we go. We'll just, is that working? I think you should have the ability to. I've disabled share screen. Okay, let me just.
Stephanie, does the presentation have to be in full screen in order for the video to play when you click it? Sometimes that's the case.
Yeah, like
I wonder if you
doesn't-
need to put your presentation in full screen for it to go.
yeah. I'm just having my mouse, it's just not reacting here. So yeah. What so okay. Let me see participants. So Angela, I'll make you, hopefully I can make you, if my mouse lets me. I'll make you, like it's jumping around everywhere. Make you a co-host. And then you can share it. I apologize for this.
No problem.
And I appreciate you jumping in, Angela. Thank you. Awesome. So there we go. So yeah, play this, please. Oh, we got to share your sound though. When you're sharing your screen, just make sure that you're sharing your
Can you
sound.
guys hear me?
Yeah, but then when you share the
Can
screen,
you
there's a,
Can you see what I'm sharing
yeah,
now?
yeah,
Okay,
you
here
can
we
see
go.
that. But so just a sec, I'll just stop you there. If when you go to share your screen, there's a little button down in the corner and it says share sound. So if you could just share
back.
when you, yeah. So yeah, when you share, then you'll see which screen to share it from, and then there'll be like a little share sound.
Says, I don't see that.
Oh, you won't see it until you start sharing.
Oh, let me try again. Oh, yes. Okay.
Oh, your godsend. Thank you. Great.
Check this out.
You're probably asking yourself, what am I doing at a baseball game, and what does baseball have to do with discourse? Well, according to G, a discourse is a kind of identity kit. It's a costume or set of instructions that makes us recognizable to people. It gives what we do meaning in specific social contexts. So for instance, at a baseball game, there are certain ways of dressing. There are also certain ways of speaking, like, "Hey get some glasses, man, you stink." Or, "Hey beer man, one beer over here. Hot dog, right here." All of these things have meaning within the specific context of the baseball game. They make sense to us in this space. But what happens if I go to a fancy restaurant? "Hey, waiter, beer over here, please."
Where the hell do you think you are?
Sorry about the language.
Or, what if I go to a school? "Hey, teach, get some glasses, man, because your grading stinks."
What? So you better check yourself.
This example provides a general idea about what G means when he talks about discourse. and in particular, the relationship between discourse and literacy. At the baseball game, I was able to demonstrate that I was literate in the discourse of being a fan at a game. But I was illiterate in the discourse of being a customer at a restaurant or a student in the classroom. But what else does G mean when he uses the term discourse? And what does he mean when he distinguishes between primary discourse and secondary discourse? Here I am in my home, and it's in my home that I begin to acquire my primary discourse. And I do this through interactions with family members, friends, community members. It's in this space of the home or the immediate community that I begin to acquire my primary discourse. But then I leave this immediate area and I enter into other social spaces, like a school. And inside of school, I begin to acquire and learn secondary discourses. And one of these secondary discourses that I learn in school is what we call academic discourse. And this is the ways of reading and writing, communicating with peers and teachers, kinds of language that we understand as typical for school. In this scenario, the academic discourse or the school discourse represents a dominant discourse. And G defines a dominant discourse as a discourse that we become literate in to advance in society in certain ways. And they can vary from context to context, but we know that given education and the value of a diploma, the fact that a college graduate today will make $1 million more over his or her lifetime than a non-graduate, demonstrates that becoming literate in academic discourse is also becoming literate in the dominant discourse. In our lifetime, we'll become literate in many, many kinds of secondary discourses. And even in a single social context, even in a classroom, we could see many kinds of primary and secondary discourses converging together. And in the process of becoming literate in many kinds of secondary discourses, we can also begin to develop what G refers to as meta-knowledge of a discourse. And that is when we are able to step outside of a discourse and then look back in at it and understand its internal workings. Understand the way that the discourse shapes meaning, shapes the kinds of language that we use, the interactions that we have with others. And in the process of developing this meta-knowledge, we can begin to transform discourses. And in the process of transforming or hybridizing these discourses, we can open up new avenues for meaning-making and understanding. And this is something that we can really think about when working with our students, is this idea of creating critical understandings about the discourses that shape our lives.
Awesome. Thank you. Great. So yeah, so you can see that oh, you can keep sharing if that's okay, sharing that screen. And then if that's okay, if we can just work off of this, and then I'll just tell you when to move forward. So discourse, it's that socially accepted association among the ways of using language, of thinking, and of acting that can be used to identify oneself as a member of a socially meaningful group or social network. So, there's discourses in all different languages. There's discourses in English. There's discourses in the classroom as well. And when we tie that to that iceberg theory from Cummins as well, then we have that just kind of the discourse that we use for those interpersonal communication skills, or which usually are that primary discourse when we talk about it, or there's the secondary discourse when we're starting to use that cognitive academic language proficiency and building that up. All right, can you move to the next slide? Thank you. And thinking about discourse and how it relates to the language strands, so for listening, if students are listening to an oral text, they're using that oral text to predict and anticipate what's going to follow. If in speaking, they can show those demonstrations, those relationships to ideas such as time, cause and effect, contrast, and emphasis. And when they're reading, they can look at those different connectors like reference, substitution, ellipses, conjunctions, and so forth. and also for writing. So knowing those transitional devices that connect from one element in a text to another as well. So yeah, so we have those pieces of discourse. So we're trying to develop that meta discourse with our students. Thank you. Can move to the next one. And again, so just thinking again, when we're thinking about discourse, we're thinking about the buildings, we're thinking about the structures of language and how those, I'll say secondary discourses and primary discourses change depending on the language that we're using. So yeah, so we're looking at the building piece when we're talking about discourse. Thanks. And the next one. And, just like it was said in the video, in school and across disciplines, there are a variety of discourses that students and, we as different disciplinary teachers work with, right? So we read and write and think differently in our different disciplines. So, we're scientists, we ask more why than what. Whereas in English language arts, we're looking for figurative language and trying to figure out how that works. And or when we're writing, in writing, we're paying attention to the organization, those details, and voice as well. And then, but in science, there's a strong predominance of passive voice as well. And then thinking about, our different languages and that they construct their buildings differently. So, and we're thinking about, how we build a house in Canada, right? We build it kind of with wood and things like that, and to fulfill that purpose. But, in other countries, say Germany or the Philippines, the construction of that house meeting the same purpose has a different structure to it. So, and when we think about language, how that's evolved, and, it builds those structures based on the culture that it's set in. Great. So, and then just thinking about reading and writing afloat on a sea of talk. So I'll just get you to tap. So when we think about this time students spend engaged in academic conversations, it doesn't just develop those oral language skills, but it also develops that high level of literacy and cultural insight. And tap. And, because talk is the foundation of literacy, from phonological awareness to what we hear. If we're hearing it, we're using it. If we're hearing it, we're understanding it, that we're able to pick those pieces out. So, and when you think, that we're students right from the beginning, they're learning to manipulate their environment with spoken words before they do that with written words. So it's the basis. And, so our EAL students, they need immediate access to instruction that can develop those abilities to share their thinking, both orally and in writing. And we're going to talk about a few ways to do that. So that's some of the work from Fisher and Fry. I'm not going to take some time because I have a video at the end, and now that I messed up some time of your valuable time with my computer techno failure. But this resource here, it's a language, accountable talk session. There's a link to some talk moves for students to use for discourse about talking about any subject. And then there's an article as well on the other side. Yeah. So, but I'll get you to go to the next slide. And hopefully it doesn't just start playing. Yeah. So thinking about discourse moves. So this relates to the previous slide as well. But, when we're thinking about discourse, what building are we wanting our students to work in? Or, maybe they need multiple buildings to make sense of an idea. So these are some templates, that teachers can use, and then also that students can use when they're negotiating an idea with their peers. So, how to support an idea, how to build on an idea, comparing things, summarizing as well. So these are just a couple of ideas that you can use in your classroom to support that discourse as well. Okay. And discourse ties into the academic language functions. So in the video, he was talking about meta discourse and understanding, like taking a step back and looking at the language. So when we're thinking about academic language functions, we're thinking about the language that's dependent on the purpose. So we're thinking about our students describing things, explaining things, persuading things. So what is the purpose of the language, of the task that you're working with? And then also thinking about the language structures and thinking about the words themselves and how they're strung together into phrases, sentences, and paragraphs. Because if we think, if we go back to that academic language, by discipline chart, we can see that words and phrases and paragraphs and sentences are strung together differently to a degree, depending on the discipline that we're in. So I have a chart in here that kind of breaks it down about what the function is, and then what the student's using that language for, and working your way through, and then what's the structures that students need to be aware of to complete those tasks that are associated with that function. So if you want students to be able to define or identify, are they familiar with the to be, the to be verbs and the declensions of that, action verbs, prepositions, and or when they're informing, is it, do they understand how adjectives, or what adjectives and descriptive language look like, or superlatives and comparisons? So, or even some of those little signal words, right? So, and I'll just share an example with you. When I'm trying to learn French, and the first class that I was taking was that the instructor was saying, okay, at the end of each class, I'm going to be asking you what you have planned for the upcoming weekend. And then when you come back next week, I'm going to be asking you what you did on the past weekend. And like, all I had down was je m'appelle Stephanie. Like I didn't have future tense. I didn't have past tense. I wasn't able to, and I didn't have a word bank of things, of like laundry, going to a movie, having dinner with friends. I didn't have that vocabulary. So I went to the shoulder shrug that we see our students use, because I didn't have those scaffolds from that instructor to help me with that language. So when you're thinking about, the tasks that you're asking your students to do, thinking about the components and that meta discourse that they're going to need to complete that task is something to think about and plan for. There is a link to that document. So just so you can see for all the different language functions. And when you kind of look at it, it's a little bit like Bloom's taxonomy, and higher levels of thinking. But, again, what are the structures that students need for that? So yeah, I'll move on from there. And thinking about those signal words, some of those are highlighted in that previous document. There's another document here. There's a handout of different signal words. So, and, students need to become familiar with those transition and signal words so that they know where, so that they can follow the writer's thought. And also when they're writing, that they can use those signal words in their writing. I was working with a teacher once, and they had a 30-2 student that they had in their classroom. And they said, they have making their point, but there's just something missing in their writing, and I just can't put my finger on it. And when you look at their writing, they don't have any transition or signal words. And that's just something, you know, especially by the high school level, that we kind of expect our students to be able to use. So, you know, so thinking about those signal words and what can we do? And, you know, they're those signposts that they need to show where they're moving towards. So, so we need to explicitly teach those transition and signal words, and but how? So, so the next couple of slides will answer that question. So we can just get you to move on that. Next ones, please, Angela. Oh, hope Angela's still there. Thank you. And also, you know, so the benchmarks, the new benchmarks, they highlight kind of that connections and transitions continuum as well. And so when you're working with students, you know, if you maybe have a level A student that, you know, they're kind of just using the and a lot, or but and or, but it kind of gets you to see the progression of where those different functions of the language and what they're using those functions for, and what kind of signal words and things that you can kind of introduce either through sentence frames or breaking apart the text a little bit. And then we'll get you to move to the next one, please. Thanks, Angela. So even looking at, you know, a model, like a mentor text, and thinking about, you know, the features in the mentor text that you maybe want students to work towards. So, and that they could start implementing in their writing. So if we deconstructed this, then I'll get you to just tap on that, please. And we can see the text structure, and then just keep tapping. So we can take a look and see that, you know, there's about 100 words in there. We have different patterns of sentences. We've got short and long, and how they're worked. And then if we look at the language features, I'll get you to tap again. And the language structures, you know, we have some ellipses that are used to describe. You know, it could have been split into two sentences, but why are they joined by that comma? And even the word cautiously, like introducing that to students, or the moment, or the yet, the comma yet, and the mountains are mine. What does that do? So, you know, talking about using a mentor text for that. And even, you know, like when we're talking in science, a mentor's text of, you know, a lab procedure, or what that may look like, or a little piece of academic writing, source analysis in social studies. So, and another way to make it apparent for students is also just to deconstruct a model. So I'll let you, now that you, once you have the presentation, and again, that you can take a look at this video, but I've done this as well, that you take a mentor text and cut it up by paragraphs, and then students are looking for and trying to justify why this paragraph comes before this paragraph and the following paragraph comes after it. And because they're looking at the language features of it, those transitional words, those signal words that show the progression of the writing. So, you know, making language manipulative. It just doesn't have to be math manipulative, you know what I mean. So then, but then just trying to break it down so that students are using some of that metacognition and looking at the language and developing that meta discourse. So I'll get you to go in there. Oh, it's going to play, but just skip to the next one. There we go. And, you know, giving something like this on how to deconstruct a text. So, you know, just, you know, what's the title of that may be, and then looking at the different functions of each paragraph. Maybe the first function was to, highlight the topic sentence. Maybe it was to compare, maybe whatever it was used for. So breaking down those pieces of a text. And yeah, if you just want to click the next one again, thank you. So grateful for this. And then it just helps students become familiar with those discourse patterns. And if you click once more, great. So then we're just going to put it, so that's just, just making things explicit for our students, that they can play with that language, giving them some language frames and sentence starters to, so to start their thinking in comparing or clarifying or whatever it may be. And then we're just going to take a couple of minutes here to put it all together. And I'll just get you to click on the next one. So the pieces, that we're kind of highlighting are based on Katie Arnett's work, creating a language environment. So we want to create a physical and a cognitive space. So that physical space is, that language where language is used to carry out daily life. So, and when you think about the word walls or the visuals, those pieces, just like if you're traveling abroad, those pieces are going to help students understand the pieces that they need to complete a task. So, and also giving those little pieces of instruction. So whether it be looking at how words change because of the affixes that we're using, or looking at, sentence frames so that they can use comparative language or evaluative language, whatever it may be, and creating that cognitive space so that students know what to do with the language. So teaching language, teaching your EAL students when they're in the classroom, and giving them those scaffolds so that they, use the language to share their understanding and building with that. So again, if we're just asking students a question and then they go, that's not going to further their language. So having what to say instead of I don't know, that would be part of your physical space, but it also shows them what independent learners, what the language is that independent learners use. If you have kind of sentence starters like those discourse frames, sentence discourse moves available for your students, whether it be a chart on the wall, or maybe you just have it on rings and then students work through that, and building in activities to do that. So thinking about those pieces as well. So, and then I'll just get you to move to the next one. So making the invisible visible. I just also wanted to share a little bit about, complex text and making that accessible for our students. And if we just click through parts of these, there's kind of two ways of doing that. And one of them is through pedagogical scaffolding. So what are they doing before, during, and after reading a text? And so we want to introduce and build up that background knowledge through key vocabulary and connections. And again, that key vocabulary can be either your bricks vocabulary or probably bricks and some mortar words, right? So to help with that prior knowledge. And then, so that they're building on and drawing from their full linguistic repertoire, so that they're making connections to their home language, or, maybe not necessarily English is their second language, maybe it's their third or fourth. So what do they know about, and drawing on all of that so that they're not just limited to just the English in the classroom. And also looking at those text structures, those discourse signals, those morphemes, those affixes, those cognates as well. And then a little bit of text engineering is just taking, we're not simplifying the text, but we're, building the language of the text. We're adding some linguistic clues, and maybe we add some repetition in there. And then we're adapting some of those key structural elements. So maybe we're adding some headings, subheadings, maybe we're chunking the text a little bit. Maybe we're putting some focus questions in there to guide the students as they're reading. And then again, just reminding us that students, they need as many opportunities as possible to be exposed onto a concept or a theme, as well as have access to quality language models that demonstrate those important language qualities again. So there's a bottom link in that page just to show you some examples of how to engineer that text, both of those sites as well. Great, thank you, Angela. So we're going to just watch one of these videos here, just the first one that says Georgia on there. And we're just going to look at how this teacher put vocabulary and discourse all together in his science lesson. Great, thanks.
If you remember from last week's experiment, this thing, if you spin it, it generates electricity.
In Peter Hill's 8th grade science class, students are learning to read and think like scientists, closely reading a complex scientific article. They are developing a conceptual understanding of how electricity works.
I was talking to a scientist once, and he said, look, my job is 10% experimenting, 40% writing, and 50% reading. So I want kids to kind of have a middle school version of that experience in my classroom. Basically today, we're going to read a really complicated article that explains why moving magnets over wires makes electricity. All of this stuff is focused on this target. I can explain how magnets and wires work together to affect electrical energy. So today we're going to learn the why. I had a pretty complex text that I wanted the kids to dive into. It had complex vocabulary, complex concepts, and a lot of the concepts were abstract. We're talking about things like atoms that nobody's ever seen before. So we needed to find ways for the kids to really tackle that complex text. The first thing we're going to do is a pre-reading activity. Before we even start the article, you're going to work in teams to do this activity that we call GPS. Does anybody know what GPS stands for? Eve?
Global Positioning System?
It does for most scientists. For us, it's standing for something much more basic: glue, paper, and scissors. All right, so you'll see what that... Before we started reading, we looked at the vocabulary that was going to turn up in the text. I took the text that you're about to read, and I took out all the key vocabulary words. I sliced them up into individual little tags. With your teams, you're going to take apart those tags, you're going to spread them out, and you're going to talk about the words. You're going to organize them on that blue piece of paper in a way that makes sense to your team.
Are we going to do sentences? Yeah. So maybe like
all the types
let's
of
do like a
energy.
mind
Like maybe we should have like what it is on one side and like the
So we have a heterogeneous class with readers from all over the world and at all different levels. The value in that activity is the kids sitting together and talking about the words and just having those in the forefront of their mind so that we can transition right into reading the text.
What about conduction? Two words that I was struggling with were induction and conduction.
Do you remember the video you guys watched about Tesla?
Yeah.
He invented the induction motor.
During the activity, it helped me like know which one is which.
Like, what does a train conductor do?
He controls the train like to where it should go.
Yeah, so there's an element of movement usually involved.
And how they interact with electricity.
It's like causing something to happen, making some movement. So that, you can probably think about how that relates to electrons.
We're going to actually tackle the article now. So you have a choice to make about how you want to read this article. This one, which is the article in the separate note catcher. If you feel like this stuff is totally brand new to you and the categorization might be difficult, grab this one, which has the note catcher kind of embedded right in the text. We think it's important that all kids read the same text. We just had different options for how the text was formatted.
Peter came to me before this lesson and said, you know, I want to use this particular reading about electricity, but I'm concerned that it might not be accessible, especially for some of our English language learners. So he took me through the article and the note catcher that he designed.
We found a way to chunk out the text and embed some note catchers and sentence starters in those note catchers. So students that are struggling with reading or students that are learning English could access that difficult text, but with just some scaffolds built in so that they could still be successful.
I chose an article that had a sheet and then an extra note catcher attached to it. And I tend to write a lot, and by having that extra space, it makes me want to write more and have more detail in it.
I chose one that would suit me best on my level of the topic electricity. And the one I chose had a vocabulary section and a section where you can take notes.
One thing that's hard for students is moving back and forth between the text and the notes. I took the note catcher and divided it along the same headings as the article. Guiding them in that movement from the article to the note catcher and back helps them keep track of their thinking as they read.
I'm going to read the first paragraph out loud. And then at the end of the paragraph, I'm going to ask you to do a cat pee on the page. Because remember, cat pee is the strategy we're going to use to keep ourselves focused while we're reading. We have a classroom strategy that we use all year long, and what kids do is, as they're reading, they code the text in one of four ways. They could make a connection to something they know, they could ask a question, they could translate the information into their own words, or they could predict what's going to happen next in the text. So we affectionately call that cat pee. Flip a switch, turn a knob, plug in a battery, press a power button. All of these actions turn on the electrical devices that we use each day.
When someone reads the text, rather than focusing on reading, you can actually focus on like what it's actually saying and what it means.
I think it's important for kids to hear difficult things read with the proper inflection and read well. That gives them an opportunity to hear the words and to hear the cadence and the sentence structure. Since everything in the universe is made of atoms, everything in the universe also contains electrons. Okay, write down what you're thinking right now. Okay, lean across the table, talk to the person that you're facing, and have a conversation with them about what you were thinking when you read that paragraph.
I said everything in the universe contains electrons.
I said electricity is based off of electrons.
I did connection and I said if two electrons touch each other, they produce electricity.
So as the year goes on and kids become more comfortable with this close reading strategy, that frees me up to go around and check in with kids.
If you just rush through a text, then you wouldn't understand anything about it. But if you like read it carefully and you use cat pee, then you can you would understand and you would know what's going on in the text.
I think you've got what you need to be able to tackle this at home. We're going to use it for a group activity tomorrow. So put that in a safe place so we can get done.
Great. Thank you very much. So, yeah, so the second video is just the next day of that. And just looking at, you know, when you're thinking about this activity, when you think about there was reading, there was listening, there was speaking, there was writing, all embedded in that activity. So building up that vocabulary, having those discourse pieces with it, and you know, making something that was a little bit harder accessible for our students. So just a strategy for you there, bringing it all together. Okay, and it's going to automatically play the next one, but yeah, so sorry about that. So there's a couple of resources that that helped me build this resource as well, or this session as well. And you know, Jeff Swears pulled a lot of articles from him, and also just thinking about disciplinary literacy, as especially it's, you know, really coming to the forefront for you know, when the students are entering into junior high, high school, and how can we support them in you know, discipline specific classrooms. Also, if you just click on that EAL toolkit for me, please, and it will take you to just a little section of a page here and just talking about cultural contexts and communication styles as they go through, as you're working with an increasingly culturally diverse classrooms, and just some things to consider about, maybe discourse isn't something that, and talking in class isn't something that students may be familiar with from the school that they were with previously back home, or maybe they've had interrupted schooling as well. So that could be a little bit difficult for them. So just thinking about some of those cultural aspects that you may need to scaffold a little bit more with your students. So yeah, so, and that's this toolkit as well is just something for you. Feel free to go through it. And it's a resource that I worked on building and over the summer for teachers. So lots of different strategies in there, lots of different resources there for, understanding language acquisition. Great. And yeah, so hopefully I touched on some of the importance of vocabulary and discourse in academic language. And also, I don't know if anybody wants to stick around and share something from their Learn. I have the Learn on the next slide there if you want, if there's anything, and also just remembering the survey. And then maybe your survey feedback Stephanie needs to get a better computer. So, but is there something that you loved in this session? Is there something you're excited to start or something you want to ask? You feel something that maybe might be ready to implement, or maybe what's your next steps? Is there any of those that you want to share in the chat? Or if you just want to turn on your mic, that'd be fine too. Okay. Oh, here we go. Great. Yeah. Happy to connect this information to the benchmarks. Yeah. Gotta map it. Yeah. Next steps, digital word walls. Great. Awesome. I'm glad you found it helpful. Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for your feedback. And again, if you have any questions, my email's on the slide. Again, it's bit.ly/vocdis and vocdis. And I'm very, very grateful to you, Angela, for helping me out with this. And I think I can stop my recording. And